evening, Mr. Chen, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of tonight's debate is that Antarctica should be left to the penguins. And we, the affirmative team, believe that this statement is completely and absolutely true. I, as the first speaker, will introduce you to the unique environment of Antarctica and define the topic. I will explain the Antarctic Treaty system and the Madrid Protocol, leaving you in no doubt as to why we should continue scientific research and exploration of Antarctica, especially in relation to climate change, in order to leave it to the penguins. Our second speaker will explain the human impact on Antarctica, with a focus on tourism and fishing. Our third speaker will rebut the negative team's argument and summarise our case, leaving you in no doubt that Antarctica should be left to the penguins. We have interpreted the topic as meaning that humans should not interfere with Antarctica, defined as all land and ice south of the 60th parallel south and the surrounding waters, for purposes other than scientific research and exploration. The word penguin has been interpreted as a metaphor for all animals that inhabit Antarctica, as well as the Antarctic environment. My first point is regarding the Antarctic Treaty system, living proof that the world wishes to preserve Antarctica. As it is well known, Antarctica is a unique environment that should have taken every measure to have it preserved. To date, this has already been recognised to some degree by the Antarctic Treaty and related agreements, collectively called the Antarctic Treaty System, or the ATS. The articles of the ATS set out what can and cannot be done on the Earth's only continent without a native human population. We have many places on Earth that humans are destroying, and so it should be that at least Antarctica should be left to the penguins. The treaty entered into force in 1961 and currently has 50 signatory nations. The articles of the treaty cover the following: that the area is to be used for peaceful purposes only, that there is to be freedom of scientific investigation, and that no new claims shall be asserted while the treaty is in force. Nuclear explosions and disposal of radioactive waste are prohibited. Thus, the current ATS is consistent with acknowledging Antarctica's uniqueness and preserving it for the penguins. My next point discusses the logical requirement that scientific research should continue on the continent while it is not interfered with. If Antarctica is to be left to the penguins, as it indeed should be, it is imperative that scientific research continue there. Climate change, through global warming, has had a significant impact on the Antarctic environment and consequently its animal life. The Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, SCAR, in their 2013 update, asserted that ice shelves along the Antarctic Peninsula have changed rapidly in recent decades. The overall reduction in the total ice shelf over the last 5 decades has been estimated to be over 25,000 kilometres squared. If the Antarctic ice caps continue to melt, the oceans of the world will continue to rise. If all of the ice melted, the world's oceans would be over 60 metres higher. To stop the melting of the ice caps, global warming must be halted. The next 10 years are crucial for this, and ice caps must continue to be monitored so that we are aware of the rate of change. Ongoing responses of the marine ecosystem to climate change have been observed and include a shift in plankton from larger to smaller species, a shrinking of Adelie and Gentoo penguin populations. There has also been low breeding success rates of emperor penguins due to changes in food chains and sea ice changes. Samples of ice, known as ice cones, are regularly drilled through the ice in Antarctica by scientists. They are removed as a long cylinder of ice that gives an indication of the past, going back tens of thousands of years. The properties of ice, dust particles, and air bubbles trapped in the ice give valuable information on the Earth's climate at various times in the past. It is vital to understand the past in order to preserve the future. For Antarctica, it is to be left to the penguins. It must continue to exist. It is vital that scientists continue to monitor and research global warming and its solutions to the subsequent changes of Antarctica and its penguins. If this work were not to continue, there will be no Antarctica left for the penguins, and ultimately no penguins at all. My final point addresses the Madrid Protocol and how it actively works to benefit Antarctica. Parties to the AT adopted the protocol, which provides the comprehensive protection of Antarctica, the greatest wilderness on Earth. The Madrid Protocol was adopted in 1991 in recognition that the Antarctic environment should be protected by a comprehensive and legally binding agreement. The protocol designates that Antarctica as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science, establishing environmental principles for the conduct of all activities. Having said that scientific research and exploration must continue in Antarctica in order for it to survive, and therefore to be left to the penguins, it is with some conditions. Nations who set up research pods must take responsibility for their footprint on the land. The Australian Antarctic Program is developing procedures for cleanup and remediation of abandoned work sites and disused tip sites. In early days of the program, waste management consisted of disposal to ocean tips and sea icing, which involved pushing waste into the sea ice. This would then travel to the sea when the ice broke. Commitment to the Madrid Protocol confers the obligation to clean up work sites and tips. In conclusion, I have clearly demonstrated that Antarctica should be left to the penguins. I will leave you with a quote by Marlin, Connecticut, Professor of Oceanography and President of SCAR. Many people do not realise that Antarctica is like a canary of a coal mine. When it comes to global warming, Antarctica serves as a thermostat to the Earth. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that Antarctica should be left to the penguins. We disagree with the definition given by the opposition, and we define the topic as the continent Antarctica and its surrounding oceans and all of its flora and fauna. And we define should be left to as that humans should completely pack up their devices and abandon the region completely, handing over all responsibility. We agree with their definition of penguins. However, we, the negative team, strongly believe that this statement is false. The first affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that we have ruined everywhere else, and Antarctica is the only unspoiled place left. This is wrong because Antarctica has already been affected to the point of no return by humans. However, we do concede that Antarctica is one of the least human-affected places on this planet. The first affirmative speaker also tried to tell you that climate change is killing species, and that human presence in Antarctica is causing it. However, the human presence in Antarctica is not the only cause of climate change. Human presence on this Earth is the main cause, and this will not stop affecting Antarctica. So humans leaving will not stop climate change and the effects of it in Antarctica. The first speaker of the affirmative team has also tried to tell you that human interference in Antarctica has already caused many species to be forced to near extinction. And if we stay in Antarctica, more precious wildlife will disappear. This is wrong, because who's not to say that without human interaction, these animals will suffer? We may have already caused the issue, but we need to accept our mistakes and teach ourselves how to rectify them. There is no way to do this other than to stay hands-on in Antarctica and to continue to help with conservation. Today, as first speaker, I will be talking to you about the importance of Antarctica for scientific research and for global collaboration. Our second speaker will be talking about how leaving Antarctica would be irresponsible and how it would be potentially dangerous for the animals there, as well as the need to control tourism. Our third speaker will rebut and sum up our team case. I will be discussing 2 points. My first point is that Antarctica is incredibly important for conducting breakthrough research in aiding the survival of our planet. This is because Antarctica is a very unique and special place in our world. It is one of the most untouched and pristine places on our Earth, i.e. it has comparatively not been affected by the exploits of humans and remains largely unexplored and uncolonised. Therefore, it is an ideal place to collect research about the natural world and the effects of humans on the environment. Few of these places still exist. Therefore, it is very important that we collect information from Antarctica while we can. Antarctica is used to collect data in the fields of geology, geography, cartography, geomagnetism, astronomy, meteorology, glaciology, oceanography, zoology, biology, and botany, to name a few. Data collected is used by scientists for references and comparison to that in other parts of the human-inhabited world. Research conducted there addresses critical issues such as climate change and the increasing demands for food security caused by human population growth. The lives and body functions of animals and plants in Antarctica are also studied, alongside medical research and human biology. The observational research in Antarctica into things such as sea level, weather patterns and seismic activity also play a critical role in weather forecasts and natural disaster predictions and warnings. Also, ice core samples can trace changes in climate going back millions of years. If we were to leave Antarctica, a great amount of technological advancement would be lost. According to the Australian Antarctic Division, more than 100 projects are currently being undertaken in Antarctica. This leads me to my second point, that we should not leave Antarctica due to the importance of the global collaboration which occurs there. Antarctica is owned by no one, but many nations claim to do so. Among these nations are Australia, Norway, France, New Zealand, Chile, Argentina, and the United Kingdom. There are also many stations from other countries there as well. The conduction of research, as well as individual endeavours, means that each country must cooperate as many of the claimed territories overlap. This cooperation helps to strengthen bonds and ties between countries and is one of the few places nations are forced to work together. This cooperation allows ideas and knowledge to be shared, as these United Nations can achieve things that could not have otherwise been accomplished. As we grow into an internationally centred world, through the technological advancements of our time, cooperation becomes increasingly important, and therefore we should not leave Antarctica. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we the negative team strongly and definitely believe that Antarctica should not be left to the penguins. As Marty the zebra from Madagascar says, the penguins are going to Antarctica, so why can't I? Thank
you. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, the topic of tonight's debate is that Antarctica should be left to the penguins. We, the affirmative team, strongly agree with this statement. Before proceeding with our team's case, I would like to take the time to correct some misleading statements the opposition has made in theirs. We continue to maintain that our definition is superior to the opposition's. Scientific research should be allowed in Antarctica, and here's the major reason why. If we were to discontinue all scientific research, we wouldn't be able to understand things like geography as well as we do, as the opposition has said themselves. In researching Antarctica and conducting studies there, we're able to understand how to better maintain it as well as this planet so that there is an Antarctica to leave to the penguins in the first place, and therefore penguins there for it to be left to. They've also said that it's important that we maintain the cooperation and the research there, but again, we think this research is fine. Tonight, our first speaker, Jack, has already spoken of the impact of global warming on Antarctica, outlined the Antarctic Treaty system, and stressed the need for research and exploration in order to leave it to the penguins. I will now speak of the impact that we have already had on Antarctica and the Antarctic tourist industry. Our third speaker, Georgina, will conclude our argument by summarising it as well as pointing out some flaws in the negative teams. Commercial fishing still occurs in Antarctic waters. The population of krill is in danger as global warming is already responsible for drastic falls in their numbers, and now suction harvesting threatens not just krill but the entire ecosystem that depends on them, including penguins. Catch limits were implemented in 1991. Catch limits did initially help to regulate fishing, but they were aided in part by the collapse of the Soviet Union and soon proved to be ineffective. Krill catches more than doubled in little more than a decade, from 100,000 metric tonnes in 1999 to 210,000 tonnes in 2010. Fisheries near Antarctica cause many problems, including the potential for overfishing, damage to non-targeted species that get caught in the nets, habitat destruction, and danger to predators as their food supply is diminished. This information was sourced from the Australian Antarctic Division, sponsored by the Federal Government of Australia. Regulating fishing in Antarctic waters has failed as levels of fishing and illegal fishing have risen. This would suggest that the only way to preserve the Antarctic marine life is to ban all fishing in Antarctica and leave it to the penguins. There is also the issue of tourism. In the early years of tourism, the 1950s, tourists would often disturb penguins, litter and take natural elements such as rocks as souvenirs. Though educational issues help to reduce this sort of behaviour, there will always be someone who's careless, be it due to stupidity or indifference. In the 2012-2013 tourist season, over 35,000 tourists visited Antarctica. Although tourists spend a relatively short time there, it is a high impact time compared to scientists and support workers. There is also one issue that continues to be problematic to this day: oil spills. In 1989, the Haya Pariso was carrying 130 tourists to the Argentine Palma Scientific Station when it ran aground. 600,000 litres of diesel oil spilled into the ocean, causing one of the worst environmental disasters in Antarctic history. The slick covered 30 kilometres squared. Oil slicks in the stubborn ocean tend to last longer due to the colder weather. In mid-1990, lower penguin, seagull, skua, giant petrel and cormorant populations were still noticeable to scientists. More recently, in 2007, the MS Explorer, a tourist boat carrying 154 people, hit an iceberg and sank. Within days, the oil slick grew to cover 5 kilometres squared. Antarctica is the world's last great wilderness. It would be an environmental tragedy if we failed to recognise this and in the process ended up destroying it. The damage we've already done shows that this is very possible. We must continue to monitor, protect and understand Antarctica. We must not destroy it. Antarctica is not the only natural wonder affected by tourism. The following examples are more than enough to convince society that Antarctica should be left to the penguins rather than be destroyed by humans. Humans have had a detrimental impact on the Great Barrier Reef, destroying much of the coral. This will in turn ruin the balance of the ecosystem. Another example of human destruction is Granite Island. According to an Adelaide Mail article published in June this year, the fairy penguin population of Granite Island dwindled from over 1,500 in 2001 to just 26 in 2012. It cannot be disputed that throughout human history, whenever industrialised cultures have interfered with the land, the health of its ecosystems almost immediately declined. For Antarctica, this cannot be allowed to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I have spoken of the impact humans have already had on Antarctica and the damage that has already been done. Thus, we have clearly demonstrated that Antarctica should be left to the penguins. I leave you with a quote from Bob Hawke, the 23rd Prime Minister of Australia, on the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the Madrid Protocol. We remind future generations of their responsibility to protect this unique continent and maintain international harmony in the spirit of the treaty and the protocol. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that Antarctica should be left to the penguins. However, we, the negative team, strongly believe that this statement is false. Before I move on to my argument, ladies and gentlemen, I would first like to point out some flaws in the opposition's argument. The first speaker of the affirmative team has tried to tell you that we should stay out of Antarctica as we have already caused enough damage to the environment as it is. While we may have caused damage in the past, we need to continue to stay in Antarctica in order to fix our mistakes and create cleaner and greener alternatives in the future, which I will expand on in my second point. The second speaker tried to tell you that the definition excludes any positive advancements made in Antarctica. This is wrong, because we still stand by the fact that the definition encompasses all human interaction in Antarctica. And just because we deem something to be beneficial, i.e. scientific research, it just doesn't give it a get-out-of-jail-free card. The second speaker also tried to tell you that tourists have been careless in the past. While this may have been the case, there are many more restrictions preventing any situations like oil spills occurring now, leaving this point invalid. Our first speaker has already talked to you about the importance of scientific research, as well as Antarctica in relation to global collaboration. Tonight, as second speaker, I will be talking to you about a need to control tourism and how leaving Antarctica now would simply be irresponsible. Our third speaker will rebut and sum up our team case. This evening, as I have said, I am going to be discussing 2 points. My first point is regarding a need to control tourism within Antarctica. This is because we, as a human race, are naturally curious. We are so desperate to know the unknown and have a constant need to quench our thirst for knowledge. As Vincent de Thier, American physiologist and entomologist, said, "Man has a hunger to know, and to many a man, being endowed with the capacity to know, he has a duty to know." If we are to decide as a global community to leave Antarctica to the penguins and set up restrictions regarding our rights to visit, there is no doubt that a sour grape out of the bunch is going to find a way to get to Antarctica. The prospect of legal repercussions does nothing to stop the desires of the human mind. A prime example of this being whalers. They don't care about the impacts of their hunting. Scientists from Stanford University's Hopkins Marine Station in California, USA, used DNA samples to estimate that humpback whales could have numbered 1.5 million prior to the onset of commercial whaling in the 1800s. They'll willingly go out and hunt this species to near extinction just for a couple of extra bucks. If not for regulations being in place, something very like this could happen in Antarctica. Thus, having small amounts of tourism and legal hunting options available, the possibility of illegal acts being committed is nearly abolished. To paraphrase, regulation and control of activities in Antarctica is a much wiser decision governments can adopt, rather than essentially abandoning Antarctica and leaving the penguins to cope with whatever damaging illegal activities humans may commit as a result. My second point will be regarding how leaving Antarctica now would simply be irresponsible. When you picture Antarctica in your mind, what is the first thing you think of? The most likely response to this question would be answers such as icy glaciers, crystal clear snow, and penguins belly sliding off hills. We picture a pristine land unaffected by human influence. However, this most certainly is not the case. As stated by the Australian Antarctic Division of the Department of Sustainability, Environment, Water, Population and Communities, previous human impact in Antarctica includes, but is not limited to, harvesting some species to the verge of extinction for economic benefit, killing and disturbing other species, contaminating the soils, and discharging sewage to the seas. Can you, ladies and gentlemen, imagine how disrespectful it is to this previously untouched land and the animals that inhabit it if we had to simply pack up and leave? We, as a human race, need to learn to accept responsibility for our actions and learn to continue to clean up after ourselves, a skill which was taught to us in kindergarten, for crying out loud. We can't leave all of our abandoned and rusting research stations to the penguins to clean up. We need to stay in Antarctica so that we can find viable solutions as to how to patch up the deep hole we dug ourselves. This is no question of right versus wrong, ladies and gentlemen. This is a black and white representation of what we need to do to give these penguins and other animals part of this natural habitat quality of life. It is the humane, respectful and dignified path to take. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we, the negative team, strongly believe that Antarctica should not be left to the penguins and that the human race needs to continue to have influence. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman and opposing team. The topic of this debate is that Antarctica should be left to the penguins. We, the affirmative team, believe that this statement is completely and utterly true. The negative team have said that Antarctica should not be left to the penguins. This is incorrect. Antarctica is a unique environment and one of the last places left untouched in our world. It deserves our consideration and protection, especially considering how we've wronged it in the past, and should definitely be left to the penguins. Now, the negative team have tried to tell you that we are wrong in differentiating between scientists in Antarctica and any other human contact. Now, we do think that scientists should be allowed in Antarctica, and we've said this very clearly. The negative team have not thought about our reasoning and have not addressed our reasoning at all. We are hoping to limit the human contact to make it as minimal as possible. But as our first speaker already explained in length, Antarctica needs these scientists in order for the penguins to survive. We wish to conserve Antarctica, to leave it to the penguins, not to abolish contact with it entirely. Antarctica is one of the last great endeavours for explorers and holds valuable information that can help us in the future. But tourism, on the other hand, is just people who want to see all the wonders of Antarctica. Want, not need. Tourism causes far more problems than travel for research purposes, with large numbers of people all travelling to specific locations at once. It has a large impact on the land and environment, as we said, causing things like oil spills, and being overall detrimental to the penguins. Research is necessary, tourism is not. The negative team have also said that by leaving Antarctica to the penguins, will be ruining the cooperation between nations that would otherwise we will be unable to achieve. This is incorrect. We agree that Antarctica should be used for scientific purposes, as I've already explained. It's the only way to save Antarctica, and so the people will still be able to collaborate. And it's not like nations aren't collaborating elsewhere in the world either. Maybe it's not to such a great scale, but it is still happening, so they're wrong in making this statement. Also, they tried to rebut us, but we said that tourism is bad for Antarctica, that should be stopped. We didn't say that all human contact should be abolished entirely. The negative team have also brought up that humans are naturally curious, and that this gives us a right to explore Antarctica. This is a get-out-of-jail-free card. Being curious may be a reason to explore things, sure, but it is not a reason to interfere and destroy an ecosystem like the one we have down on Antarctica. The negative team have also said that we should stay on Antarctica because we were already there and have affected its environment, so we should change. But this only appeals to tradition. It does not mean that we can't leave it alone now, or at least restrict our contact with it, so that we can preserve it for the penguins. Also, I'd like to point out that their first speaker said that Antarctica was relatively untouched, but the second speaker said that it was very touched. They've contradicted each other, and I think that they need to get this straight if they're going to continue to debate. So, tonight our first speaker has talked about the unique environment of Antarctica and shown you why this needs to be preserved. He explained the Antarctic Treaty system and talked about why we should continue scientific research and exploration of Antarctica, especially in relation to climate change, in order to leave it to the penguins as it should be. This is very necessary if we want to conserve such a wonderful place in our world. He also introduced you to the Madrid Protocol, which is important in terms of our environmental protection of Antarctica. Our second speaker has explained the negativities that Antarctica has been subject to in the past. He talked about the impacts humans have had on Antarctica with a focus on tourism and fishing, and showed you why we do need to do something to change and protect this beautiful continent without abolishing our contact with it entirely. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we, the affirmative team, have clearly shown you that Antarctica should be left to the penguins. It is as acclaimed journalist Andrew Denton once said, if Antarctica were music, it would be Mozart. If it were art, Michelangelo. Literature, it would be Shakespeare. And yet it is something even greater. The only place on earth that is still as it should be. We may never tame it.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for this debate is that Antarctica should be left to the penguins. We, the negative team, believe that this statement is false. The affirmative team defined should be left to Antarctica as humans should leave, excluding scientists and explorers. They said without scientists there would be no Antarctica to leave. Well, we agree scientists do have a very positive impact. We don't think Antarctica will disappear without them. This leaves no reason why we should be left to exclude scientists and explorers. The first speaker of the affirmative team has tried to tell you that we should leave Antarctica to the penguins. That it should be left to the penguins because there are fuel spillages, and there have been fuel spillages in the past. While there have been fuel spills in the past, we do not see this as a reason to leave Antarctica to penguins. The United Nations Shipping Agency, namely International Maritime Organization, barred the use of heavy fuel oil below 60 degrees latitude south in 2011 to reduce fuel spillages. Fuel oil ban is a rare thing for Antarctic tourism, a binding rule. The International Maritime Organization is also going to enforce a polar code. This polar code will detail safety standards for ships entering both the Arctic and Antarctic regions. This code is due to be implemented by 2014. 2 tourist ships have sunk in Antarctic waters, the first being the Bahia Parisio and the second being the MS Explorer. The sinking of the Bahia Parisio in 1989 spilled 600,000 litres of diesel fuel into the ocean, roughly double the amount of fuel spilled by the recent Rena disaster in the Bay of Plenty. Luckily, the fuel was diesel, which biodegrades reasonably well, rather than the kind of heavy fuel the Rena was carrying.
The MS Explorer is a well-known commercial tourism vessel that was purpose-built for the Antarctic several decades ago. The quick sinking of the ship occurred in November 2007. Fortunately, everyone on board was rescued, and just minor pollution resulted from the light diesel fuel it carried. As you can see, the only two major fuel leaks that have occurred in Antarctica have caused minor damage, and any future accidents should cause even less damage due to the new restrictions and regulations in place. The second speaker of the affirmative team also tried to tell you that tourists should leave Antarctica to the penguins, because tourism is bad for Antarctica. While we, the negative team, believe that Antarctica should not be left to the penguins, we acknowledge that tourism in Antarctica has a need to be monitored and restricted. Unlike the affirmative team, we do not believe that the industry should be terminated altogether. There are many companies that want to educate their passengers about Antarctica. Jared Kite of Peregrine Adventures runs 4 small cruise boat trips a year and adheres to very strict guidelines for sustainable tourism. He said that it is a very powerful way of educating people, and the majority of these people return from their trip as vocal advocates to save the wildlife of Antarctica and combat global warming. Scientists at Palmer Station say while some damage has occurred, an 8-year study by the National Science Foundation found no effect on the Adelie penguin population. In addition to this, there are many restrictions and measures taken to leave a minimal impact on the environment. The International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators has adopted voluntary standards to keep visitors from disturbing wildlife. Visitors must remain a certain distance from penguins and boats with over 500 passengers are not allowed to land. No waste is allowed to be dumped overboard, and storage containers are taken to remove all waste from Antarctica. There are also large areas that are restricted from tourists. These restrictions have caused the tourist industry to decline and become substantially more eco-friendly. Furthermore, Australian-based adventurer Tim Jarvis sees Antarctic tourists not as a problem but as a benefit. He said, if these tourists see the impacts of climate change, they'll become more inclined to protect the continent. He goes on to state that there is an overreaction about tourism in Antarctica. Antarctica is 14 million square kilometres, around the size of Mexico and the US combined, with only 35,000 visitors in 2 years. As you can see, tourism, if regulated correctly, can educate many people and inform them about Antarctica, allowing them to support it. We would support an emphasis on small eco-tours rather than large cruise liner tourism, and we believe that it is positive for Antarctica, therefore we should not leave Antarctica to the penguins. The second speaker of the affirmative team tried to tell you that we should leave Antarctica because of overfishing. The majority of animals in Antarctica, including penguins, depend on krill. Therefore, we agree that it is important that krill and other species are not overfished. Scientists have estimated that the krill population has declined 80% since the 1970s, but they accredit this to global warming, not overfishing. Also, the conservation of Antarctic marine living resources say that the annual allowed krill catch in the Southern Ocean is 4 million tonnes, but the current krill catch is slightly more than 210,000 tonnes a year. As you can see, krill, the main food source for Antarctic animals, is continuing to provide a sufficient supply of food for the animals, and therefore this gives us no reason to leave Antarctica to the penguins. The third affirmative speaker said that staying in Antarctica is merely a tradition. This is clearly incorrect. We need to stay here to clean up the mess we have created, to regulate rules and to continue research. Our first speaker spoke to you about the importance of scientific research as well as Antarctica in relation to global collaboration. Our second speaker spoke to you about the need to control tourism and how leaving Antarctica now would be irresponsible. So Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you can see that Antarctica should not be left to the penguins.